Most people think World War II ends with liberation, with victory, with the moral clarity of good versus evil. But I came across something that doesn't fit that story at all. A record, a category, just 2 words in the US Army paperwork: other losses. And behind those words, maybe one of the darkest and least discussed episodes of the post-war world. I'm making this video because the story this book tells raises a question that I think is very relevant even now. What happens when suffering is produced, not by hatred, but by administration? The title, Other Losses, comes from something very specific. After the war, the U.S. Army reports tracked prisoner counts, and alongside the normal categories, transfers, releases, there was another category. Just 2 words. Other losses. Not deaths, not starvings, not missing, just other. Bach argues that behind this euphemism is the disappearance and death of massive numbers of disarmed German soldiers held in Allied custody after the war ended. We're talking about, according to Bach, 800,000 to 1 million. And these are just soldiers. Another estimate given of the total, unrelated to this story, of Germans who died after the war is about 7 to 10 million. They were also, the Soviets were even more brutal with them, and there was starvation, famine, and plague as far as like diseases going around. Anyway, these massive numbers of disarmed German soldiers held in Allied custody after the war ended this is not during battle, this is after surrender. So what changed after the war? The core mechanism in the book is something bureaucratic but incredibly important. Many soldiers were not treated as normal prisoners of war. Instead, they are redesignated as Disarmed Enemy Forces, or DEFs. This sounds like a technical distinction, but it matters because POWs are protected by the Geneva Convention. DEFs were not. Bach's claim is that this reclassification created a legal gray zone where protections could simply be removed. And once protections are removed, everything becomes possible. How people die without massacres. What was it like for the German DEFs? Picture the war ending not with celebration, but with silence. Thousands of German soldiers, teenagers, old men, exhausted survivors stumbling out of the ruins of Europe. They are told the fighting is over. They believe this means captivity will be harsh but orderly. Instead, they are marched into open fields. No barracks, no roofs, no beds, just mud, just wire, just sky. You have to imagine what it means to be held in a camp with nothing built, not even tents. Men sleeping pressed against each other like animals, digging shallow holes in the earth for warmth, trying to shield themselves from the wind and rain with scraps of cloth. The ground becomes their only shelter. Food does not arrive the way prisoners expect. Days pass. Hunger becomes the dominant sensation. Not hunger like missing a meal, but hunger that becomes dizziness, then weakness, then deliriousness. Men trading watches, rings, anything for crust. Some chewing grass, some collapsing without sound. There are no proper latrines. Disease spreads through mud. Drinking water is scarce. The stench of thousands of bodies with no sanitation hangs over the camp like a fog. Men begin to look less like soldiers and more like ghosts. And perhaps worst of all is the psychological shock. These men surrendered believing they had entered a system governed by law, the Geneva Convention, the norms of captivity, but now they are told that they are not prisoners of war. They are something else, a new category. They are disarmed enemy forces, and that bureaucratic phrase becomes the difference between being fed and being forgotten. You can picture it, endless rows of barbed wire, fields filled with silent figures, no work, no purpose, no future, just waiting, waiting for food, waiting for release, waiting for someone to remember they exist. This is not a story of industrial extermination. It is something colder. It is what happens when human beings are reduced to a line on a forum, managed, contained, deprioritized, until suffering becomes administrative. That is what it was like for many of the DEFs, as they were called. Not dramatic evil, not fanatic hatred, just exposure, neglect, and the slow realization that the war may have ended, but mercy had not yet returned. And again, the number that Vox suggests is 800 to 1 million German POW, well, not prisoners of war, they're DEF deaths, mostly in US and French custody, though a lot more died under the Soviet custody. I mean, they were literally just sent to gulags or shot. But when we're talking about allied, like non-Soviet ally, of this supposed, first world countries that are supposed to be following the Geneva Convention and so what. That's a shocking claim of other losses. He suggests these deaths occurred through starvation, exposure, and neglect in the Rhine-Wenslager camps. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that properly. And yet all you hear in the news is of the quote-unquote concentration camps, where I completely disagree with the mythical number of 6 million, more like 100,000, and it was not. If you read Irving and others revisionists, you'll find that there was never an intent to kill them off. They were thinking of Madagascar and Palestine, that they should be sent. But during the Evian Conference, the United States and no one took them, because of the Jews actually didn't want them to be taken by other countries, because it would set a precedent. They wanted the conflict to. They wanted what they have now, which is a bargaining chip to do whatever they want in Palestine, and what the genocides they're committing. They're being worse than they were treated. I disagree. I think 100,000 was a more likely number, or maybe max 250,000, and I think it was more not. It wasn't under. They were not gassed. The Zyklon B was for killing fleas and actually keeping them from disease, because by the end of the war, with food scarcity and diseases were running rampant. That's the reason they were burning the bodies. That's the reason for cremation, is you don't want the other. They actually were protecting inmates from getting sick. Yeah, all we hear of is the Holocaust. That is all we hear of. We don't hear of what happens to the Germans. We don't, and you should watch my other videos to understand World War I. That was a war that was provoked by England, and Germany was not the aggressor. And then at the end of World War I, we placed, we as in the Western world, placed the Versailles Treaty, which was totally unjust and basically led to someone like Hitler arising. I mean, what did they expect? After being treated so terribly, of course you're going to get a reaction, and that was actually part of their plan too, so that they could smash Germany again. For the Mackinder, under the idea of the Mackinder-Heartland theory. Anyway, what makes this so unsettling is that it doesn't require anyone to feel like a monster. I mean, I personally do not like Eisenhower at all. I think I just think he rose to power too quickly. He was essentially, Eisenhower was essentially a plant. He was put there because he was a good boy who did what he was told to, even if that meant exterminating and creating this situation that killed at least hundreds of thousands of German soldiers. But yeah, bureaucratic harm does not need hatred. It only needs indifference with authority. So where does Eisenhower fit in exactly? And of course, this raises the question, who was responsible? Bach places this within the structure of Allied command, ultimately under Eisenhower. Now, that does not mean Eisenhower personally ordered mass deaths, though I think he hated the Germans. You know, it was better to get taken into custody by someone like General Patton, who did not hate the Germans. He hated the Soviets. He understood the Soviets were the problem. That's probably why he was involved in an accident later on that killed him. General Patton we're talking about. But Eisenhower was the Red Army's favorite general. Stalin gave him, Soviet Union ended up giving him a medal later. They loved Eisenhower. Eisenhower also returned certain German prisoners to the USSR, where their fate was gulags or death. Which is, and these are not even necessarily, these are just soldiers. These aren't necessarily people who voted for Hitler. In fact, at his height, Hitler only had 46% vote. So one out of every two people, more than one out of every two people, was innocent of, the crime of, if you want to call it, for voting for Hitler. Even though Hitler did do a lot to help Germany in the short term, and he was also, he loved the West. Hitler did. He didn't want to fight us. He wanted to go towards the Soviets, and I think we should have let him. Should have let him take care of the commies. There would have never been a Cold War. It's ridiculous. But history is plagued by a bunch of establishment lovers who don't seem to be able to question the past. Anyway, so Eisenhower was pretty much responsible, because the system existed under his authority, and under his authority resources existed, food existed, intervention was possible, but the machinery kept moving. He was a good little order taker, Eisenhower, and that's why he was raised to general so fast and then became president. There's nothing exceptional about Eisenhower. He was just a good order taker, a good little Nazi, as they say. So the deeper warning here, and this is why I think this matters beyond the historical controversy, because the lesson here is not simply, look what happened in 1945. The lesson is, this is what modern systems can do. When suffering becomes a logistical outcome, when human beings become categories, when death is recorded as other losses. Horror doesn't need ideology, it just needs paperwork. Victory does not automatically make power innocent. Administration does not make cruelty disappear. And indifference can kill just as surely as intent. Though I do believe there were also probably a bunch of soldiers who saw their brothers die because we had to get involved in this stupid war, and were pissed off. And when you let soldiers take care of other soldiers who they just defeated and lost friends to, they're going to treat them like crap. And that was part of the Morgenthau plan anyway, was to turn Germany into pasture land, essentially. But luckily that did not become policy. Anyway, thank you for listening. If you'd like to watch more videos like this, please subscribe, and I'll see you the next time. I actually have many videos that are related to this and content, so please do subscribe and take a look. Thank you.